You are in for an interesting ride.
Okay. Hello and welcome to another episode of the ET Newsroom. Today I'm going to be speaking with Peter Vincent, our remote viewer and dowsing detective, and he suggested that it might be a good idea to look at what might constitute evidence using the system he uses. So these colours and numerical codes that go together or can be used separately do seem to have an incredible degree of accuracy. But not a lot of people really put much store by them because I guess the system seems a little arcane, though dowsing itself has been used for very many years, probably hundreds. So we're going to be having a look at things like missing people, even missing dead kings of ancient times. We'll be having a look at the strange disappearance of flight MH370 in 2014. We'll be looking at a variety of things, including, I might say, a very, very strange event that happened to Bill Brooks, who experienced some weird, bizarre link with Fred West, as in Fred and Rosemary West, the serial killers. And what he experienced and reported was very interesting. And Peter has some comment about that. So we'll be hearing about this. And for those folks who don't know about this book, it's the most amazing story. It took me nearly 3.5 years to get this story written because it was painful, it was traumatic, and it was also so off the wall, so out there, that Mike Smith just thought that the secret he'd kept virtually to himself for the 20 years since he had a download showing him that he'd been taken all his life, and that happened in 1994, the download, that people would just think he was crazy. So anyway, folks, let's get on with our episode and let me know what you think in the comments. And for those of you who are used to seeing me producing work quite regularly, I shall be taking more or less a break, a hiatus in my interviewing work. And whilst you may see me post comments and links to things that I've already done or am working on, I'm going to be focusing on getting eclectia out there in the world in a meaningful way. In the meantime, please do enjoy this episode of the Dowsing Detective, looking at the evidence. Certainly you want to strap yourselves in for some of these mind-bending conclusions that are arrived at with Peter. Maybe it will inspire you to try using the system he uses. Okay, folks, enjoy. Hello, everybody, and this is the ET Newsroom here with Peter Vincent, our dowsing detective. And Peter thought it would be really helpful, and so do I, if we did a little rundown of evidence that Peter has highlighted in some of the videos that are already there. But we thought we'd do this video simply about the evidence for the Sunday, 8th of April 2024.
Well, hello everybody again. As you know, we've been doing a series of films on YouTube called The Dowsing Detective, showing the discovery of the system, how colour works on the mind sensory code. So basically, we can look at a photograph and determine whether the person is alive or dead with the colour codes we use, which are set colour codes for male and female, or cremation for burial. There are also other codes for death by volcanic action, stonified, we call stonified human remains. So we pick up on specific cases of interest to test out these findings, and we work with other remote viewers as well. So what we do is we code a person as to whether they're alive or dead. If they're alive and they're supposed to be dead, we then code them fully into something that you could say is rather like a DNA code. So you have the person's sex code on the top, which is pink, white and silver for a female, no silver for a male. And if they're dead, then it's black and yellow added at the end. And the bit in the middle is their unique little band of colours. So immediately, if you've got 7 billion people in the world population, you can cut that in half straight away just by putting, if it's a female you're looking at, just by simply having the pink, white and silver at the top. That splits them off from the pink and white. This is rather like the barcodes on products that you buy. There are multiple millions of variations you can have of these colours and these numbers, and we could, I know, extend the colours quite considerably, but it would make life extremely difficult. So first of all, we ask the colours of a person, and then we put those into the numbers, which is a zip code left to right, which is also called radionics, or we hold them in a colour barcode, something similar to this, which is the male burial code, pink, white, black and yellow, and we hold them top down in our hand like that. Now you can see all the demonstrations in the other films on the etnewsroom.com YouTube films, Grove 1, Grove 2, The Mound, all sorts of different subject matters, and please do refer to those as we go through with this case. Now, as you all know, an airliner disappeared many years ago called MH370, and there's been an awful lot of discussions and conspiracy theories. We made a bombshell discovery only a few weeks ago because we hadn't done this before. And I want to show you how this system works first, to show you the evidence with a person who's been missing and we have found and reported, and an archaeological item that Joe and I and Joanne did not realise had already been examined. A large article in the Daily Mail stating that it was thought that King Henry I was buried in a car park in Reading next to an old disused jail. We thought that's just the sort of thing we'd like to have a go at.
And that's only just been discovered in
during last year, 23. The first thing I did is go on Google Earth and look for a car park next to a jail. So that cut it down quite a bit. So I got this car park up. Then they published a painting, Henry I, in the press, which I will show you now. This is the image that they published. And this is the professor who's looking at it, Philippa Langley. Unbeknown to her, did a bit of work on Richard III. We were asked to look at a car park, not knowing anything about it at all. Could we find any burials under the car park? Well, we did, and we found it near the building. We all sent our reports in. The next thing we hear about is a lost king's been found in a car park. So whether it was something to do with her organisation that did it, we don't know. And we were all correct, obviously. So when this came up, we thought, well, we'll have a look at that. Having coded that photograph into Henry I's code, so there's his pink and white as a male, there's purple for a royal colour, here's gold as a royal colour, and there's the black and yellow, which shows that he's dead, and all these other colours just actually add to the response. There is the radionics equal to that, 13.719.42.5.11, which is gold, 10 and 5. So having got that, we go over the Google Earth maps, and bingo, we found burials down here, males. This is the Reading jail area here, the Reading motorway here, and this is the car park. Not knowing anything about this whatsoever, that's all we were looking at. And we got these male burials down here, and a female burial here, a male burial quite close, responding to this code. And what I'm going to do is to see if I can just demonstrate to you, because these photographs hold the magnetic images of whatever's in the ground, and that's what these codes do. So we work over photographs, you see. So if I come here, the rods just want to cross over that image because that value there is caught magnetically in that image there. I reported this to the archaeology department of Reading County Council, and I had one or two communications with them about this, what we found, and this confirmed other people's findings. And to cut a long story short, we discovered that there'd already been a ground radar survey done of that car park, and here it is, showing exactly the position that we'd found at the end of that car park, the angle there, at that very target point. So that is where the lost king and his wife is buried, under the car park. That this had been down on ground radar, where the angle comes down to the building and then the division wall to the old abbey there, and the car park being down here. We're showing you this for evidence, basically, that there is the angle at the bottom there of the car park here. That's where we found the responses there to that code, unbeknown that this had already been done. So we just said we can confirm that this is actually the burial spot for King Henry I and his wife. And hopefully they will do an archaeological dig. I then found that a channel TV programme was already doing the groundwork for this. But what I'm trying to say is that this is evidence of the system that we use. And other people can do this. I can give these colours to anybody else and they can use them. The difficulty is them getting the colours. That is where the secret is. But other archaeologists can work with these colours. That's somebody who's dead.
Right, so Peter, as you said, we've looked at a dead king, somebody who's long dead, and now we're going to look at what?
Somebody who's thought to be missing, presumed dead, but not proved to be dead, but we have found is responding as alive in the system that we use. Now, I'd just like to confirm that although I find these codes and these matchings, I like to get other remote viewers to support them or to say yay or nay. And if it's a nay, then I will have another re-examination. But it's better at least 3 people come up with the same positive answer. Then you can pass it on to the necessary authorities. Not that the authorities seem to be particularly engaging in communications about a lot of this. Only on one occasion I had over-the-top communications, and we all came to the same conclusion that the person had been murdered and fed to the pigs and part of thrown in the Thames. The person is at present serving a jail sentence, but I don't think any body was ever found, you know. So now we're going on to the next thing. We all know about this Claudia Lawrence case, where it been raised to our attention by a press article on the BBC asking her for some television licence money for her property that had been left empty, well, since 2009 in York.
And then just in something like 2022,
the BBC decided they wanted some television licence money from the house. But I personally think this was to really stir things up a bit, because it didn't seem to be much sense behind it if it was an empty property anyway. The thing is this, that we thought, well, we'll have a go at that. So we worked off the photographs like this on the internet. So here we have a lovely photograph of Claudia Lawrence.
So that was 2009.
Yeah. And to our amazement, it responded as alive and not dead. The police thought she'd been murdered, you see. I thought, right, well, we'll use the dead code. And there was absolutely no response at all to black and yellow added. So I thought, well, that's strange. Pink, white and silver is for female, alive. And I get a perfect response to her being alive and not dead. So I immediately coded this, and then I thought, right, okay, the photograph's not responding as dead but as alive. So basically, holding that, going over the photograph, get a very strong response. I just reported this, basically. That's all you could do, you know, and just leave it at that. But every now and again I check on this, and I find at night that the house responds, and then during the day the restaurant responds. So we're picking up an alive person that matches that person's photograph. If she'd married a Greek and had a family, who will not have the same name at all, will have a European passport and therefore a Greek name. So nobody stays the same, especially after nearly 15 years or whatever it is. So therefore your looks, you look older, your hair changes, or you put on weight maybe and things like that. So of course, the way you earn your living might not change. So if you were a chef, and maybe you'll be working with a restaurant. And that's what interested me, that if we found a response in a restaurant. And without poking into people's private affairs, found quite a few interesting manoeuvres here. So we'll leave it at that. So the reason that we've got this case, following the Nicola Bulley case, so we found that she was in the funeral parlour and then left the funeral parlour and landed up in the burial ground. So we knew, therefore, that the code that was in the funeral parlour must have represented where she'd been after she had gone missing. Jo, my fellow remote viewer, we picked her up alive up to the Wednesday after she had disappeared, and then it suddenly went dead. And that was the reason of our previous film about what had happened. These basic codes will tell you from a photograph whether the person is alive or whether the person is dead. If you're alive, that's the code as a female, and if you're dead, that's the code. If you're a male, just remove silver. You establish the situation from the photograph, and quite often we do this to start off with, but what is important about this, these colours will follow you wherever you are, even if you are dead. So if somebody was to dig a body up or take organs from you, those organs and body parts will still stay the same code, but will be dead on the move. And the remains of the body will be in the static position where it should be. If you're dead, you should be in one position only, in a tomb or a grave. You shouldn't be moving about. But if you've donated your organs to somebody, and I'm saying, being polite here, donated, then you will be moving about dead in that other person. And this is something that people haven't got their heads around yet, but there is no hiding on something like this. We have to follow a set pattern. We can't change the codes we use for alive or dead. Everybody has their own separate identity code, and we follow a strict rule. Are they alive? Are they dead? If they're alive, then let's code the person. But what is interesting, if you do code a person and you can do this sort of work, you can actually communicate, more so if they're alive, with their mind through this thing, through the photograph. This is why certain religious groups don't like their photographs being taken, because it captures your soul. And your soul is alive all the time. The brain goes to sleep, but the mind doesn't. This allows you, on that basis, to code a single person to a single code and follow them about, see what's happening. Are they dead in one place? Are they dead in multiple places? Are they moving about? If you put this map on your mobile phone, you can send it to anybody else. And with that code, they can go over that mobile phone and see what response they get with a pair of rods or some other. And others found the same thing. So he worked off another photograph that responded as alive and not dead. So we thought, well, what's going on here? This is interesting. No drag there whatsoever. Now that is because that is the dead code. Silver, black and white. Silver for the female, black and white for the state. So here is a female alive, pink, white and silver. So there's no black and yellow. So that photograph is linked to that person. It crosses. That's because that person is alive and not dead. And it's female. So we then coded the photograph to a full code. Pink, white and silver, red, green, orange, and that's brown and grey. Claudia Lawrence, there we are. So that means that that photograph should respond to that code. And by Jove, it does.
Very strongly.
Very strongly, yeah. So the next thing is, and I'm going to show you this, I followed this person to because it happened to go to my holiday resort in the Greek islands. This person I noticed on the beach that had a facial feature and the same colour hair, and allowing for putting some weight on, etc., because of the Greek diet. Basically, I already tracked by remote viewing, and I'll explain to you where we found it first. So there's the photograph there. I go over this photograph here, and it goes perfectly all right. There's a magnetic draw to it, because the magnetic images of this code represents that person that's the same as that person. So what I'm going to do now is to use another code. I mean, if I was to put Henry I's code over there, it wouldn't work. Now I'll show you. No draw whatsoever. You don't feel absolutely anything whatsoever at all on that colour code. That code there represents that lady there, those images from 2009. So the thing is this, you want to know why. Then we have the radionics code. So we picked up, first of all, northern Greece, a response. We had to find out where on the world map, and when I say a world map, we go over this map first. The whole of the world we go over with the code, and it will show up. It's a unique code for that one person. So this showed up in Greece down here. So we then go on a big map of Greece and find the area of Greece that it responds. And then we go on Google Earth to pick up that area. And we found it in a small beach resort in a farming community. And we picked up the response in a church. And then it went down to the beach resort. So we followed this, other remote viewers and I, for about 10 days. And then it left via the church to the G5 Greek motorway to a city called Metropolis. Then it got on a ferry and crossed the Gulf to the other side, where the car journey continued to an airport whence we noticed a flight. And we thought, well, the flight could be going anywhere. It could be going to Cyprus, could be going to Crete. Who knows? It went into Kefalonia, the very area that I was going on leave to. And I thought, well, I can't wait for this, you know. So basically, we then thought, well, where in Kefalonia? Well, Lassie, the place where my hotel is. And then a workplace in Argostoli. So now what I'm going to show you is this is aerial satellite views of Argostoli and the hotel. Now, Greece is two hours in advance of us. So it's, 2:15 here. It'll be 4:15 in Greece, right? I'll be back at work at 4:15 because I believe that this person is operating as a chef still. So basically, this should, yes, it responds. So somebody of that image is there. This also tells you that this is a UFO-related situation that we've got here.
How come?
Well, every single one of us has different DNA. Unless you are an identical twin, or like the lady who has two heads, they have the same DNA. That causes a problem to remote viewers because you pick up one that's on a journey somewhere and the other one can be dead in a ditch. Every single one of us has a different DNA, and therefore we are on the code computer, because that is exactly what this is a computer barcode. So because we're all identified, it is therefore possible to communicate with the photograph with that identical code, just as you would make a phone call to another receiver in Australia or goodness knows where. So
These unique ID codes transcend time and space, though can equally be found whether eons of time have passed or otherwise with non-local attributes. Maybe this is how the great seer Edgar Cayce accessed the detailed information on the many people he gave readings for.
A dimensional code, essentially.
yeah, yes. In other words, if we had an astronaut on Mars, you can follow them on Mars. If you've got an image of them, you can code them. This is very dangerous, don't forget, because there's no limit. You don't have to be just an ordinary person working in a shop or working in a bank or an office. You could be the president of a country or the spy master general. You're codable. You know exactly where you are, whether you're 100 feet below the ground, whether you're in an aircraft, or whether you're in somebody else's property. Wherever you are, if they want to know where you are, they know where you are. That's all there is to it. So here we got another code here. That works because the restaurant is there. This is a map of Argostoli, the Rod's Cross, because not only is there a residence there, but it's also a place of work. But on days off, they will go mainly to a hotel beach resort, very close by, because it's a very hard job there. Temperatures can be quite high, and therefore you're working in confined areas. There's no crossover that hotel, so therefore she's not on the beach at this time. And I can tell you that you would be going back to work to start off at about 5 or 6 o'clock for the Sunday night trade, basically, and then would be back. So it would normally be on a Thursday, and it's because I followed this pattern quite a few months, having found the move from northern Greece to Kefalonia. I actually followed this person, and I got a pattern that on Thursdays they would be at the hotel having a beach, lying on the beach or having a swim or something like that. And that's how I picked this person up here. You see, and took a long distance shot of the person that was responding to the code. And happens to have the right coloured hair, the right sort of facial features allowing for a time in change in age. And of course, the Greek diet does make people put on weight, I'm afraid. So as far as we're concerned, and other remote viewers have used this code and they have found that it matches to that person, that address. Another interesting thing too is the fact that the residence I found had a red car outside, and I tried to get the number of it, and as I was trying to get the number, it drove off. However, when I looked at the restaurant in question, the side passageway, there was a red car there. Now, red cars are quite common over here, but they're not all that common out in Kefalonia. Blue is very, very rare. And of course, red is, but not that common. So both those locations had a red car outside. So that was another rather interesting correlation. Now, I've been going to this hotel for many years, and I didn't know anything about Claudia Lawrence whatsoever up until 2023. So the television license was the instigator of this. During my stay in the bar, I noticed this person because they had quite an outstanding sort of face. And a great friend of mine used to sit in the bar and have a drink, so we used to chat, and she used to be sitting at the other end reading a paper, and was wearing glasses as well, dark black glasses. And it just stuck in my mind. And when I saw that photograph there on the internet, I thought, I've seen that person before. I know that person. They might be a bit older now, but that person is the person I'm positive was in the beach bar of the hotel, but wearing glasses and looking a bit fuller in the face, but the right colour hair. And of course, that's what we were following. What we can do is report it and let people get on with it, because we don't do that side of it. All we do is we open the door for other people to have a look at. Now, this is the case of somebody who's alive, has been traced, and possibly could be confirmed as the right person. There we have a person who died hundreds of years ago, archaeologically proved by ground-penetrating radar that the burials were there. So now we get to MH370. How does this then support the amazing discovery that we think we made about this?
So now, as Peter said, we're on to the subject of the 2014 disappearance of the Malaysian flight MH370.
We've shown you how an ancient king could be traced from just the image to a colour barcode to a car park that we then found had already had ground radar on it and found in exactly the same position that we had remote viewed over maps, ever increasing the maps up. So Google Earth is marvellous because you can go down and down and down to within about 100 feet of the target. But you have to be on the target. So that's why we look at the wider area first and then, like an ice cream cone, and go down onto the bottom of the cone. So with MH370, we know that the aircraft took off late at night. It's a humid country. If you then take an airliner up to 30,000 feet, you will get condensation. There's no doubt about it. Airliners anyway, I've experienced airliners from Malta to Gatwick with condensation dripping out of the shell of the aircraft, just for the breathing and the air of everybody. So with these extreme temperatures, if you were carrying a cargo of lithium batteries, you could potentially be travelling with a time bomb, because I've actually experienced this myself with a lithium battery and LED lights, that accidentally water got onto the terminals, although the batteries weren't switched on for the lights. But the batteries then started to charge energy up and got hotter and hotter and hotter. And lucky enough, I spotted it before I went to bed that night. They were red hot, turned them off. And it was because the terminals, positive and negative, had matched up to a link, but they weren't able to push the energy out. This is what could happen in a cargo hold. Let's say condensation was to drip onto battery terminals, you could get a discharge of heat into a battery which it couldn't dispense out, and therefore caught fire and then set fire to the rest of the batteries. This is why you have electric car battery fires. You've got to be extremely careful with lithium batteries. Yeah. Now, this was the aircraft flying out of Malaysia over towards the China Sea, and it turned around. Some witnesses say an oil rig worker and a yachtsman saw the flames on a craft high up. It was known to have turned around, come back. I'm only interested in the really interesting points about this. One, that the Malaysian Air Force did not take off to investigate this aircraft coming back, which would have been common sense, quite frankly, especially if it was not communicating. Secondly, that when the aircraft got to the area that it thought it might be going to re-land again to where it took off, it didn't, that nobody then followed it up again. It then went into the sea and did a turn away from anywhere that it could safely land on, so therefore going towards the northern Indian Ocean to the land masses in the north. And then it made a sharp turn around, which most people accept was to avoid radar communications and contact. All I'm saying is that everything that we observe of this aircraft was more not to be found than to say, help, there's something wrong, I can't communicate, and I've lost controls. Then suddenly it turns around the other way, going down towards the Dio Garcia and the Chagos Islands. Incidentally, those islands are under British dependency as nature reserves, not for occupation. If an aircraft landed there or pancaked into the sea, it'd be very, very difficult to get to it because the ship only goes there every 6 months. Fisheries protection from some of the islands there. And only the odd yachts person goes there, but because the coral reef is so close to the surface of the sea, it's very dangerous for any boats. But if you did get stranded on there, there is water, there are palm nuts, there's fish, and there's birds. So you wouldn't starve, but you'd have to have a different lifestyle. All sorts of other rumours came up about, oh, there was a group of people on that airliner that had a patent to something, and that it might have thought to be a bit dangerous, and the patents died with them and went to an organisation if such was to happen. And we've got people now investigating the radio patterns. I believe it's Liverpool University is doing some of this research, and it was thought that the aircraft had lost complete communications and had gone down towards Australia and landed into the sea off Australia, and nothing was found. And of course, the black box doesn't seem to give any signal out at all, and satellites didn't seem to pick anything up. Well, I think we've got a bit of a bombshell, bearing in mind that what we've just shown you and all the other research that we've done, colour-based, bearing in mind that there's a helping hand with this, which is probably far more important and intelligent than anything we've got down here, where all we're doing is linking with it and asking it to give us things, which it does, which we use. So the first thing, I thought we would have a look at this MH370 again, because it was raised again in the media. So the first thing I decided to do was say, right, we'll start from afresh here. We'll not concern ourselves about why the aircraft went down, how it went down, but where is it that we can help try and pinpoint its location. I then looked on the internet and found about 40 passengers that had their photographs on the internet, and there were certain crew members as well. I chose, because with silver, female, I have to put silver paint in, which is a pot of liquid paint rather than acrylic colour. I felt it'd be easier to do 6 males, so I chose 6 males. Over the photograph, their images, I coded them.
Now these are 6 random people.
Yes. There are 6 random people. These are all their codes here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I code them up and I write the barcodes, and then I go over the world map to see where they respond. And indeed, they responded in the sea off Australia, where they're looking. So I can 100% agree that where they're looking is the correct position. But it doesn't answer the reason as to how the aircraft got there. What came to my attention as I was going along the road, I found that one person did not respond as dead. And I thought, well, how come? And it was this gentleman here, the first officer, Tariq A. Hamid. And that's his code. So I thought, that's interesting. If he's not dead and responding, where is he then? So I went over the world map, this sort of map here, just as we've done with Claudia Lawrence and other people. And I picked up a response on the map over America. So I then pick up a bigger scale map of America and pull it down to California. So I go over California on Google Earth and I pick up LA. I thought, well, we've got somebody who's on MH370 as the first officer who's now responding alive in LA. So here we've got the code, an aerial satellite map of LA. So 1379624885, they cross.
Again, quite strongly.
Yeah. So 1379624885, cross. If that number was not there, it wouldn't cross at all. Right, so the question is, where in LA was he? The long and the short is, got it down to this area here, Little Tokyo, the LA basin. I find that there's a workplace here. This is East 3rd Street. a car park here was used, and a restaurant down here in the corner. So I thought, well, if this isn't a bombshell, then what is? I was under the impression that the first officer, not being an airline person myself, was the person who flew the aircraft. It isn't. There was a captain. Here's a picture of the captain, right? And there's his flight simulator there, which is rather strange to have a flight simulator in your own house. Here's a code for the captain. He also coded as alive on the photograph, 1379268584. So I go over this and I get a response. It's alive over his image as he's sitting in front of his flight simulator. So you've got the captain and the first officer who do not appear to be dead, and yet the passengers do appear to be dead. Right, okay. So let's just do a little check here now. This is the mail code for alive, pink and white. So it's just his image. Look, so strong, it's unbelievable. You know?
So basically, that's a male
alive. Alive, yeah. And this one here, very strong, male alive, okay? So 2 people on that flight are not off the coast of Australia, are in LA. But what is even more interesting, they're both in LA. I found that they were working in the same building, yeah, in Little Tokyo, and there's a Buddhist temple there, by the way. The next thing I thought, well, where do they live? This is what we did with Claudia Lawrence. Found that this person, this is the first officer, lived not far from the Shakespeare Centre there. That's West First Street, right? That was his residence, and you could follow him to the place of work and then back again in the restaurant, right? So one day I couldn't find him here in the evening, so I then found that he'd walked all this way down here into this building here, which is Elmed Terrace. It's a housing estate. And I found that the captain lives in there. They work there, they dine there, and they're supposed to be dead at the bottom of the ocean off the coast of Australia. Now, that means that that aircraft, as some thought, had to have been flown somewhere for them to get off. What happened after that is another story.
What a mystery.
What a mystery. Over to you.
Thank
Whoever you
very
are.
much. Yes, who is she? Whatever you do, don't code me.
So the question is, you see, one size fits all in this system. There's no special thing for a criminal. There's no special thing for a god or a
No, everybody
or a
can
king.
be coded,
Yeah.
but everybody's unique.
Everybody's unique, but everybody can be coded. Or sadly, if you have the lady who has had 2 heads, they have 2 separate brains. They can think separately, but they have the same DNA. So they're both traceable as one unit. You learn on the job on this thing. I've been doing it for nearly 20 years. The lady disappeared in Dorset. We were chasing somebody around. The person appeared to be alive, and yet the person concerned was found dead in a ditch. The gentleman who worked for Masonics high up, he said, well, did you not realise that you could have an identical twin and you have the same DNA? So you could literally pick somebody up who was blood related to the person you were looking for, and it was the wrong one you were following.
Yeah, very interesting.
So let's put it this way. There is no limit to the depth that you can go for somebody. So for instance, if you've got somebody in Area 51, they could be 10 miles underground, and then you'd still pick them up. They could be anywhere within the solar system or beyond, and you'll still pick them up. The system that we use is so instant that it goes faster than anything can travel to get to, basically, because they've actually followed a craft back to its home destination with their permission. It only took 40 hours to do something that was supposed to take 4,000 years to do. I mean, it's unbelievable. People are coming up with all sorts of things. However, there is one thing that does concern me about this, and this, I'm afraid, I cannot easily explain, except when we did an experiment with the Arizona Psychology Group, they knew about the work that I did with UFOs, so they invited me to set up an experiment in Hemel Park, Tucson. And we in fact did 2 experiments, and they both worked 100%. I had to provide the codes for them to pick up. They went on site in Tucson. I was in Kent, working off the maps here, saying what time it would arrive, where it would be in the park, and the size that it was. And they picked this up. And on the second occasion, the first one was a round disc craft that was there for about a week and was also picked up by other people unbeknown to us as remote viewers. And it worked, the colour codes I provided. So they wanted to do the test again. the crew felt a bit unwell in the area of the craft because there is a certain amount of radiation. Radiation, smell and energy transmits through the dimensions. The easiest way to describe it is the Doctor Who's fictional series on television. It might not be so fictional now. You go into a small police telephone box and you'll find yourself inside a giant UFO, his time machine. But if you go to one of the doors on the left, you'll find yourself into yet another section of the time machine in another dimension. So the thing is, he had 3 dimensions there. And that's what we found in Tucson. They asked me if the craft was bigger than I thought it was. And I thought, well, I'll phone home. I'll ask ET, which is what I do. It's code 42. So I asked code 42, is there a dimension within a dimension? Yes. Thank you. Can I have the numbers and the colours for it? Yes. So they give me the colours. So I write the value numbers down, sent it over to them. And they found the craft was 100 foot wider and it was in a diamond shape, which of course is quite a well-known shape for one of these craft. That they mapped it and it duly went at the 1800 hours the following Friday and it was fully written up. And what more can you say?
When they were sensing the craft, it was in the magnetic field, so it didn't appear physically in our 3D.
Yeah. So
but it still had the impact of affecting them physically, i.e. feeling a little bit unwell.
Yes, that's quite. Yes, and this is what Skinwalker Ranch also finds when they have these interactions with other things, that they feel unwell occasionally. The easiest thing to do is to say that we have got multiple dimensions. How many? There could be endless dimensions. We are in our present dimension, the present time. But most of these craft are in the next dimension. But in order for them to see us clearly, they need to straddle that dimension. So what you're seeing is a glow of energy. That's why you get these glowy balls and these funny things that change shape and things. So you might be lucky to see something that looks like a cigar tube. And you find actually it's got big wings, which you can't see because it's in another dimension. Or it's got another bit sticking out there with another tube, you know. It can be straddled over 2 dimensions, if not 3 dimensions, at any one time. So we're in 1 dimension, it's in number 2 dimension, and it's got to straddle into number 3 dimension. It may be that antimatter reacts when there's another magnetic field involved in it. Because my understanding is that it's on the outer crust of the craft, so that when the craft is powered up, there is no resistance to it whatsoever. It's anti whatever it's going through. And,
very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that. That was fascinating insight, and especially with the MH370 and the 2 people.
I'd like somebody to find out what that building is, because I think it's a multiple of things within a building.
So there's no identification
No.
for the buildings that the first officer and the captain are in.
They seem to be in. I had a look today, and they were in there today.
So anybody out there, if you can let us know what those 2 buildings are, that would be really intriguing to find. I will just say that when we tested, I also did the remote viewing and then the testing with the dowsing, and I had the same as you. I got that same.
And Joe Cooper did as well. All we can do is to report this on. But the problem is, you would think with such a dynamic find that somebody would say, look, how do you do this?
Well, this is astonishing. Wow.
And I invited them. The craft landed in the Calvary ground, and I said, would you like to make a visit? Because I understand you will visit, but I won't see you, but I will feel you. I will feel the energy. Okay. So the due day came and nobody turned up. We learned by our mistakes because I forgot to put the year in. I put the year in. They came along and they did have a visit, and I could feel the energy coming up the stairs to my office. They came down the stairs. The television was on here. My wife was having a bath, thank goodness. And they sat down in the chair where you are. And I was on the chair by the window, and then I felt something, and I was warned about this. You find when they go, it takes about 15 minutes. It takes about 5 minutes to get in, 5 minutes to have a look round and everything, 5 minutes to go, But they always let you know they've come because they touch you slightly on the head. Anyway, when they'd gone, I picked up the cushion that's behind you, and the one next to it stuck to it, static electricity. And that has never, ever happened before. And that is because of the static that they were creating between the dimension they were in and the dimension that I'm in. And they came and they went back. But what is important, I had a young lady in the road at the back that overlooked onto the park, and she was doing some testing on this craft. And this visit was about sort of 6 o'clock in the evening, 1800 hours. When I spoke to her in the shop, she said, I looked at that craft last night. There was nothing in it. It was empty. And I said, Isabel, it was empty because they were round here. I could actually map them on the map, the energy coming down. And you know, I did a lot of my experimentation when I was doing a little part-time job in an antique and collector's shop. Because we all know about John Amor, who came in, and the man from wherever it was.
Well, people will have to look at John Amor.
John Amor, minister. But a lady came into the shop and I said, aren't you frightened about this? No, not really. I find this quite exhilarating. This is scientifically, I'm investigating something and I'm finding this quite interesting. I'm learning, you know, I don't go with a closed mind on this. Anyway, I was appointed what you might call a guardian, I suppose. I was invited by Alan Hayday to go and give a talk in London.
Alan Hayday being a colleague, Dowsing colleague.
Yes. He worked for the BSD water dividing group originally, and he helped me with archaeology down. He was in fact the one who taught me about colour. If it hadn't been for him, I would never have known anything at all about this. And so I agreed to give this talk in London. And I said to the entity, will you come up on the train with me and on the tube and go to this thing?
And what was this entity?
Interdimensional ET energy. It's like a ghost, but it's a living ghost that's from another dimension. So I told them in the club, would they keep a chair by the fireplace empty, please? Because we might have an unexpected guest. Alan Hayday met me at the tube station in Islington. And I said, well, Alan, we've got there's 3 of us here, not just 2. So we walked to. And I said, look, I've just given you a talk. Can any of you sort of see anything about this chair? And you know, they all picked up an entity sitting in the chair. And anyway, after that, it was a little lunchtime in the pub. And I heard 2 people talking, as I got quite good hearing. And I heard them say, that means they know everything. Ooh. I'd actually had that mentioned to me before because I went to a psychologist to ask them questions about all of this, and the only answer she had, well, you know everything. I said, well, what do you mean by knowing everything? I mean, whether this is something genetic or not, I do not know.
So just before we go, we're going to give you a quick look at some work that Peter's done on Mars. So we've done missing people, alive and dead, in ancient times and modern, and now we're going to go for distance. We're looking here at burials, I think, on Mars.
We are, yes. Because we can pick up burials down here, and we have proved this, particularly at the Colchester archaeological site on the NHS former site of the hospital, that I was asked to go over that site and picked up male and female burials in rows, and there was leather and silver in some and things, and then they sent me photographs that some of my hits are already on exposed archaeological graves.
And what era of...
Bronze Age.
Bronze, okay.
Yes, so bronze and Roman, that sort of thing.
So that was Colchester, so now we're going for ancient...
We've got the burial codes, female and male, right? And these work on graveyards down here, or archaeological sites down here. So the thing is that if they work down here, they should work over satellite images up there as well. Guess what? We find that they work. So humanity has been on Mars, or come from Mars here. So again, exactly the same as LA, Argostoli, it works. So basically here I've got the human male burial code.
Oh, no doubt about that then.
That one there, it opens up because there aren't any on that. That's an old mining area. So anywhere there was a life form in bulk. So let's do this one here now. Yeah, that one there.
That's this one.
There's that one there with the pyramids in a row. Then let's have a look at this one here. Yes, that's one there. And that's a mound. There's burials all the way around. It's almost as if the life form up there is very similar to the life form that was down here. And of course this one here. Well, basically, it seems to me that we've got ancient pyramids there, we've got burial mounds there, we've got massive areas here of burials, widespread. I said that there'd been nuclear war up there. Somebody said, oh no, there's only no nuclear war. Well, the point is it's highly radioactive up there, and I think that actually fits one of your other...
Yes, it does, Dr. John Brandenburg.
Yeah. So basically, That is very firm response there. There's definitely been human life big time on Mars, and maybe other forms too. So let's have a look at the other form, because I found that down here we've got 42s in the grove buried. So why not up here? So let's see if we've got any 42s. Yeah, over that one.
That's E.T.
E.T. is buried with humans there. Exactly the same as down here in our grove. We've got 42 burials there.
Alongside humans.
Yeah, beside humans, yeah. And there was crossbreeding between them. So let's have a look at the pyramid area. Professor Alice Roberts did a very interesting series on Egypt. And the last programme in her series, and I did send her an email about this, she walked up an enormous monument that was laying on its side that had broken because of the sheer length of it. It was 42 metres long. I mean, I must admit, we've got them under this floor, so I could be picking them up under here. I'm actually casting my mind onto the image because we've got a checkerboard pattern under here. One human male, one ET. One human male, like a chessboard pattern. And he goes into the park and starts from the road at the end, the main road at the end, and goes under these houses. Yeah, I'm not making the rods are just crossing because the colour held here matches the energy coming up from down there. But it could also be coming from ET below. I'll shave. I'll remove these and see what happens.
So this is an experiment we haven't done before.
I've got ET under the floor there. Comes up, opens up, you see. So if I come back here and they're laying this way along here, as I come off, the rod opens up there. So it shuts. So if I come this way, around here, it opens up here. So somewhere between here and here, the stains of an ET burial are in the ground there. Yeah.
What an amazing place we live on. And
we are just not being given any of the truth at all, quite frankly. But if you don't frighten me, it shouldn't frighten anybody else.
all right, Peter.
Right,
well, I think
okay,
it's
yeah.
almost cup of tea time.
Yeah,
I don't know about you. What do you think?
I think so, yeah.
Hi folks, and this is a bonus section with Dowsing Detective and remote viewer Peter Ellis Vincent. Now he's been showing you evidence as far as is possible in this system using codes that have been given by ET, and they are from the M42 area, and that is Orion. So it seems to be the M42 link with perhaps humanity in general, but Peter, who has forged this very specific link, asking for codes which are incredibly accurate, it seems. This is what we've shown here. People alive, shown an ancient king being found, the ground penetrating radar, which showed exactly where Peter had found responses to these specific codes, not knowing that that had already been done. Then we looked at the very mysterious and strange disappearance of MH370. And the bombshell there, 6 passengers just taken and coded just to give a sense of the people on the plane, and they recorded as deceased, actually in the Indian Ocean area of Australia where the search was. Then to his shock and surprise, and it should be everybody's shock and surprise actually, he found the codes for the first officer and the captain as alive. Not only that, as you have just witnessed from this video, that he's shown them alive. And what does this mean? What does this mean? And who should be taking it further? As Peter said, we open the door, we merely point information out. In this bonus segment, he had wanted to look at the Fred West murders. It is quite likely that the Wests began their murder spree from the early 1970s onward, only being caught in 1994. Anyway, Peter had started reading my book, and this is a really interesting, extraordinary story. For those who haven't read it, there aren't many stories of this complexity involving not only the ET, but certainly some military, governmental, Masonic elements to it as well. Well, chapter 7 is about an incident that happened when Mike Smith, Bill Brooks, was on leave. I recorded the book and I'm going to let chapter 7 run in its entirety, about 9 minutes, because I think it's absolutely fascinating and gives the basis for the research that got Peter interested in looking at where else Fred West might have buried victims, which remain unfound to this day. And what is interesting is some 20 or more years after the chapter 7 incident, Bill suddenly realized that it related to Fred West, probably indicated another area of murder victim burials. And he phoned the police. Their response, of course, it's probably over 20 years later and they want to keep the case closed unless they have something delivered on a plate. He told them his story and he said, I think I know where he's buried others. And what they said shocked him. The police said, we're not looking that far back. Really? What about the families? What about closure? Just because people have been killed or murdered or died many, many years previously doesn't mean that the families and their souls should be ignored. Peter has done some research on location and we'll have a look at those in some maps shortly. So first, let's listen to chapter 7. Get this book, it's amazing. This is a seatbelt time.
Chapter 7. Encounter with a serial killer. Back at camp, I kept looking for something else to volunteer for. I found life as a nuclear soldier very tedious. I decided the easiest thing was to join up for another type of operation, either the Artillery Parachute Regiment or the Artillery Commando Regiment, both of which were stationed in Britain. As I'm not fond of heights, I went for what I thought sounded the most interesting and went for the commando route. This meant I had to leave Germany to do the 2-year course, and so it was back to England where I joined the Special Forces Unit in Plymouth, Devon. At this time in my life, another weird element came into play, although I was unaware of it at the time. I apparently looked remarkably like the serial killer Fred West, right down to my hair, even though he was about 10 years my senior and was not yet on the public radar. There was something odd about my resemblance to him that would haunt me in times to come. In the meantime, the grueling Special Forces training was putting us through our paces. After about 4.5 months, in spite of sustaining several severe injuries due to the intensive training, I managed to successfully complete the army side of the training called the beat-up. I'd managed to break both my ankles during the last part of the training in the final week on the second test. It was bad enough to have a cast on one leg and a big bandage on the other, meaning I was on crutches for a couple of months doing light duties and with extra leave. One weekend, when I was due to go home, one of the guys from a sister regiment gave me a lift and dropped me off near Bristol. Normally, I'd hitchhike up the A38, and on this occasion I didn't have my uniform on, just my army parka coat. I was dropped off on the opposite side of the suspension bridge between Bristol and Gloucester. I can't recall the name of the place, but it was a Friday evening around 8:30 p.m. I'd become somewhat lost at this point and couldn't get my bearings. Luckily, there were a couple of pubs nearby, so I thought someone there would be able to point me in the right direction. I got across to one of them at about 9 p.m. After ordering my drink, the barman asked, "Are you Fred's brother?" I had no idea who he was talking about. "No," I replied. "Oh, you look like Fred the Builder. He lives in a caravan." He obviously thought this bit of information would make a difference, but I still had no idea who he was talking about. The barman asked me where I was from. "Stourbridge," I replied, telling him that I was a soldier from Plymouth and making my way home. He went on to say he knew one of Fred's brothers who looked nothing like Fred. Then he asked again if I was another brother they didn't know about. I was still clueless. Some bright spark commented that maybe Fred's dad had a bike, and it was a good job I didn't take offence. No matter how they presented it, I still didn't know who they meant, because this was well before Fred West hit the headlines. But I'm positive it can only have been the serial killer they were referring to.
I finally convinced them that I wasn't part of Fred's family and left the pub around 11 p.m, wondering where the hell I was and deliberated on which way to go. I thought if I just started walking, I'd be bound to come to a main road. In my regiment and training, we used to walk all the time. In fact, we used to run everywhere. So it was no big deal, especially as I healed very quickly and my ankles were now almost back to normal. I took a route which led me under a bridge and came out at a small road much like a country lane. I didn't try to hitch because I didn't think I'd get a lift. I put my face to the road and continued on my way. The countryside had a field that ran alongside the road. It was a crisp, chilly night with a starry night sky, and my mind turned homewards. I was somewhat startled to suddenly see a dark blue or black van pull up. It was one of the old-fashioned types with a sliding door, similar to Black Marias used by the police then. It may actually have been an ex-police van. Our bread man used to have one of a similar colour to boot. I was grateful to see a friendly reminder of home. When the van pulled up beside me, the sliding door was opened, and the driver, a woman, said with some command, "Get in then!" And I did, very grateful for the lift. It was turning chilly, so I wasn't surprised to see the bespectacled driver wearing a woolly hat and a scarf around her face. I naturally assumed I was being offered a lift, but as soon as I started speaking, the woman began laughing and to my surprise said, "Who the fucking hell are you?" I was a bit taken aback, to say the least, and explained that I was a soldier trying to find the main road so I could hitch back home. She said, still laughing, "I'd better get you to a main road before he sees you." She pointed in the direction of the field where I saw a man wearing the same kind of army-issue parka coat as myself and holding what looked like a spade in his hand. I realised later, when I had worked as a musician after the Wests had been caught, how like Fred I looked at that time. Friends would show me photographs of him saying they could hardly tell the difference between us. The scary thing is that it was true. I could hardly tell the difference myself, though I look nothing like him now. When the world first came to know about him and his image began appearing everywhere, I was frequently likened to him and, on occasion, even given the nickname Fred, which was neither funny nor pleasant. When Rosemary West picked me up, she obviously mistook me for him in the darkness, and here's the really chilling part. As she headed for the main road, I felt a tug on my sleeve. I hadn't realised anyone else was in the van. I looked around to see a girl who I'd say was about 15. On the back of the seat, there was an angle iron, and she'd put her hand through it, pulling at me, saying, "They're going to kill me. Can you help me?" She was desperately trying to get my attention, but I didn't catch on. She got me to look down to the floor, where she lifted a tarpaulin with her feet, and that's when I noticed her ankles as well as her wrists were tied together. Then I realised what the girl struggled to show me. Beneath the tarpaulin lay what I believe was the dead body of another girl. I realise now she must have been dead, but still didn't catch on at the time because her eyes were wide open and she appeared to be staring up at me. I honestly thought that these were kids messing around. I saw that Rosemary West had observed me looking at the girl. The girl spoke again and said, "Can't you help me?" Rosemary West responded saying, "Oh, take no notice. They're my daughters. They're mucking about. She keeps running off to Bristol with men, so I've had to tie her ankles to stop her." The girl quickly fired back, "She's not my mother." Rosemary West started laughing and saying something along the lines of, "That's kids for you these days." I somehow accepted Rosemary West's explanation, and it was so dark I couldn't see much detail, and besides, I'd had a few drinks, and the last thing on my mind was that I might be having a lift with the other half of the couple that were to become Britain's most notorious and prolific serial killers. Because I was a bit inebriated, none of this really made an impression on me. All I was interested in was getting home. We had arrived at the main road and she pulled over to let me out. Almost immediately, I managed to hitch a lift with a lorry. I saw her watch me climb up to the cab. As we drove, I began chatting, and after some minutes driving on the A38 toward Gloucester, the driver suddenly asked, "You came out of a black van, didn't you?" "Yes," I said. He'd been checking his mirrors as we'd journeyed on, and it seems they'd followed me for a few miles. In hindsight, I believe they were watching to see what, if anything, I was going to do. Perhaps like finding a telephone box to report to them. I think I'm really lucky to be alive, and that something was helping me to keep me alive by not letting me catch on to what they were really about. Fred West was a big guy. If he'd hit me over the head with that spade, I wouldn't have stood a chance. Once I'd been dropped off, that episode went right out of my mind, and I thought no more of it until he was caught many years later. Then I realised just what I'd seen, and the very thought of it made me sick to my stomach, and I had to find a way to get on with my life in spite of knowing the likely fate of that poor girl.
Peter assigned letters to the girls in this photo, as well as another lady whose name is Mary Bastham, who went missing in 1968 on her way to see her boyfriend. Now, these women and girls and Mary all seem to respond to these points Peter has marked on this map in a field which is very, very close to the location that Mike Smith spoke of. Then we know he had a lift with whom we now believe, and he believed to be Rosemary West, but could have no idea and really came to understand what was going on some many years later, more than 20 years later, when he called the police. So this is astonishing work by Peter, who's really located a spot where he has found 12 burials, one including Mary Bastham. I think it should call for some inquiry. I think it should at least be given that. Because we hadn't actually recorded anything with Peter talking about the fields and the information that he'd found out regarding these murdered women, I thought it would also be interesting to share another piece, that a very weird, paranormal, strange event that happened to Mike Smith that also has direct bearing on the Fred West case, and it's to do with a cellar. So I'm going to let you hear most of chapter 10, which is Life After DMOB, from 44, which is based on an ex-soldier's true story of lifelong abductions.
The cellar incident, wraiths and ghouls. We'd been living in a block of flats with a communal front door. The individual apartments had their own separate door, and in the normal course of events, both sets of doors needed keys. My wife had taken the communal front door key and left me with the one to our flat. I'd find a way to bypass the front door problem by getting in through the cellar window, which luckily was at ground level and that I usually left slightly open so I could get back in at any time. I'd been out for the evening with music friends discussing how I might move forward in life when I experienced something on my return that nothing could have prepared me for. This event was, for me, by far and away the most terrifying thing I have ever experienced. The taxi dropped me off between 1 and 2 a.m. I hadn't had a lot to drink as I was trying to keep my head clear in order to work through my current difficulties. The street was very quiet and dark, with no one in sight, and nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. As I got to the cellar window, I could see there was a degree of light spilling into the cellar from the communal corridors through the partially open door at the far end of the cellar leading to the flats. As usual, I clambered in feet first, face to the wall. I'd half slide down the wall as the floor was about a foot or two below my reach, and jumped the remaining short distance. As I was in the process of shimmying down the wall in an effort to make contact with the floor, I was startled by something suddenly grabbing and pulling at my legs, which sent a shockwave through my entire system. For the first time in my life, I felt an intense, cold shiver go through my whole spine, which was terrifying. Frozen in fear momentarily, I quickly twisted my body around to face the centre of the room, peering down through the twilight to see what it was that was grabbing hold of me. I was shaken when, in the dimness, I saw that the floor had disappeared and in its place was a gaping black chasm. My mind was reeling. I just couldn't comprehend what was happening. What was this? I did a quick rerun of the night's events and alcohol intake, wondering, had I had more to drink than I thought? Even so, I just knew that couldn't be responsible for what I was experiencing. What issued from that large black hole was one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen. Hundreds or more of what I can only describe as terrifying wraith-like figures were streaming out. These were tall, thin, semi-transparent, dark entities intertwined with one another as they clawed at me, appearing to be half in and half out of the black hole as they held on to me, as if they were intent on dragging me down. They were now at the level of my hips, wavering about with a weird, horrific fluidity, reminding me of the entities depicted in the Ark of the Covenant at the end of the 1981 Indiana Jones film, which came out later. During this time, I was aware of a strange, whooshing, wind-type sound that seemed to contain myriad voices, set at a very low level. The sounds were completely unintelligible, and no discernible language was detectable either. The appearance of the substance which made up these creatures put me in mind of ectoplasm, the material seen coming from mediums when manifesting physical beings like spirits or guides, though it's usually white, not black. I was in a state of utter terror as they continued writhing around me. I thought frantically of trying to retreat back out of the window, but that would have taken too long if I could have managed it at all. These entities were holding me fast, preventing my escape as I just clung to the window ledge, petrified. I knew that my life may depend on me coming up with a strategy, and fast. What would happen if they dragged me into this hole? This was way beyond my imagination. I was desperate. After a split-second decision, I decided to run for the door at the other end of the room, hoping I could shake off whatever it was that had hold of my legs. I just hoped my feet would meet the vanished floor as I made the short jump. I was relieved when I felt the solid floor beneath me, but feeling I hadn't a second to lose, I struck out. I could still feel these entities pulling at me as I lunged forward in a bid to free myself, and, with relief, I felt their grip loosen. I ran the few paces like my life depended on it, and maybe it did. I made it to the door, stumbling, my heart pounding like it would leave my chest. I was in a state of extreme shock, and I could hardly contain myself. It was thankfully a different reality I reached, as I scrambled into that lit corridor, slamming the door on those ghoulish creatures. I was shaking with fear. I had never scared easily, but this was the first real terror I had ever experienced, and I don't even know why. I'm not afraid of ghosts, but this was something different. These entities had a malevolence to them, something like out of a horror movie. My brain must have shut down because I feel there was more to this experience that I cannot recall. Was this simply a bizarre, freakish, paranormal incident? I felt as if I'd gone from one world to another, and it wasn't a place anyone would want to be in. Needless to say, I never used the cellar as a shortcut again. I called my wife and got hold of another front door key, which effectively brought us together for a further and brief time. I experienced a sense of confusion about that whole night because there were things about the look and dimensions of the cellar that didn't make sense. The cellar itself had appeared to change shape entirely. I needed to see it again to make sure, which I steeled myself to do the next day. In great trepidation, I made my way down to the cellar, wondering if it was just my imagination after all, perhaps some new kind of nightmare, as I opened the hallway door into the cellar. What I recalled seeing that previous night was a room of different proportions, as if it had morphed, becoming longer, with pictures on the wall and a metal plate where a fire would have been on the opposite side to me. I remember that clearly. The cellar I now stood in was quite different and back to the normal room I was familiar with. To add to the mix of high strangeness, years later, when Fred West was caught, they'd shown the cellar where he'd hidden some of the bodies on TV. It immediately took me back to that dreadful night. I don't understand how or why, but the cellar I saw on TV looked just like the German one, along with the details of the pictures that I also seemed to recognise. I couldn't get that German cellar out of my mind. It had somehow taken on the dimensions of the Fred West cellar. What could this all mean? I told my son's mother some many years later that I knew they would find bodies there, before they had, and when they did, she thought that I was more than a little strange. Interestingly, a few months before this ghoulish occurrence, I started to have horrific nightmares and daymares about bodies coming out of the floor in a cellar, and of my being arrested for murder, for no reason that I can identify. These dreams were utterly realistic, enough to cause paranoia. It was an exhausting and debilitating experience. The nightmares began after my marriage breakup around August 1974. Not that it had anything to do with this, but it was a notable time for me. In hindsight, I feel as if something in my subconscious was somehow intercepting frequencies of thought that were not mine, or they were being projected into my mind. These dreams took possession of my mind, and I became afraid, for a time, even of my own shadow. Over time, I was in a state of perpetual fear as they became a constant feature in my life. I have no idea what could have been responsible for generating them in the first place. When I awoke in a morning, there was a sense of palpable guilt and fear, but with no memory at all of any of the detail of the nightmares. I would get an overwhelming urge to go and see if the bodies were indeed surfacing from their burial places. Yet what craziness was this? I didn't know what bodies this related to, where they were buried, or where this wholly alien and irrational set of thoughts and feelings came from. Whatever it was sent my mind into a tailspin and was extremely distressing. Worst of all, I couldn't tell anyone about what was happening to me, because that would certainly have alerted the straitjacket brigade. On reflection, and after some research, I now believe that what I was experiencing were the nightmares of Fred West. The reason for this conclusion will become apparent as you listen on. Believe me, I know just how crazy this sounds. I had meanwhile realised that the name of the street where my flat was, Friedhofstrasse, translated as Cemetery Street, and heard that the estate had been built on top of a very large graveyard. Further, I now believe that what I experienced was actually a part of the West experience, which somehow related to that night back in 1971 on the road between Gloucester and Bristol, when I had inadvertently accepted a lift from Rosemary West. Maybe these two experiences were somehow linked with the nightmares, I just don't know. I also thought that maybe I was being punished for not being aware enough to help that girl in the van that night who'd asked for help. Tragically, I can only assume they murdered her too, and that her body was never found. About a month after this horrific event, I left for England with my German wife, though it wasn't long before we parted again, and finally. Within 6 months, I'd meet the woman who would become my second wife, who also had to endure some difficult times, partly as a result of the high strangeness that was happening to me, of which I was still, of course, largely unconscious. For my part, during those times, I put things down to my going through some kind of mental problems. I had no frame of reference for any of this. I thought I was going mad. In society, there is no schooling on paranormal or psi events that would have given me a clue as to what had seeded in my subconscious. The continued generation of these unwanted experiences and thoughts traumatized me in the extreme. When I awoke, if I had been able to sleep at all, I was experiencing the nightmares as if they were my own true memories. I found myself trying to work out when I could possibly have carried out such murders. Whatever this was that was interfacing with me like a mind parasite caused me immeasurable anguish and torment. The constant high-tension fear of being discovered, of being found out, despite knowing I'd actually done nothing, was crippling. The thoughts seeped through like sewage from a drain. It truly was a living nightmare. Did something happen to me, I wonder, when I died as a child? Did something happen then that set my life up for all these strange events? Was the army partly responsible? Did something infect me when I had a lift with Rosemary West? I just didn't have any answers. Meanwhile, I had to try and function in the day-to-day world and find